Hey guys, and welcome back to another video on the Design to Manufacture channel. I'm Rob, and today I'm going to be taking you guys through some Illustrator basics. So Adobe Illustrator is probably the primary software that I've been using at the moment to run my laser cutter. It is really versatile in that space. I know this software can also be used for graphic design because of its vector-based imaging. So basically everything that's done on Adobe Illustrator is vector-based, which means that it uses maths to generate the lines instead of pixels, which makes it scalable and also a lot more accurate for things like lasers to follow, in my case for the laser cutting. All right, so let's get straight into it. We'll go through some basics of how it works. We'll set up a file, and in the part 2 of the video, we'll talk about setting it up for laser cutting and go from there. So this one's going to be a nice quick one. To set up a file on Illustrator, there are some key things that you need to go through. If you don't do it properly, particularly if you are going to be manufacturing or laser cutting using this software, if you don't do it properly, it's going to really bite you in the butt later on down the track. So what I mean is when we go to new file up here, all right, you'll see that I've got a whole heap of custom presets and previous and stuff like that. But most of you guys, if it's your first time running this, you won't have the recents option. My biggest suggestion to everybody is just for your very first time running this is to go to print and go to A4. All right, an A4 size sheet to work on. It's usually plenty, and it gives you guys something that you know the size of. Everyone's seen an A4 piece of paper, and you know the size of the sheet you're working with there. If you did notice in my recents, I've got this custom 600 by 300 sheet. The reason I have this one is that's the size of the laser cutter bed that I'm currently using. So if I make my sheets the same size as the laser cutter bed, then I know everything that I'm putting on it's going to fit in my laser cutter, and I'm not going to have to worry about that. But back to where we were, print, A4. Now there's one more thing we need to do first before we play around with anything else, and that's over in these preset details. We want to change this points to millimeters. You'll see there's a whole heap of different measurements. If you are working in the imperial system, you're probably going to want one of these 3, 4 options here. Whereas metric system, which is me, I want to be running in millimeters. All right. It's accurate, it's easy, and you can see that straight away, instead of it being on points where it gives you that point thickness, if I go to millimeters, it gives me the millimeter size of an A4 page. All right. I can flip orientations if I want to, or I can adjust these measurements. That's how I made my custom 600 by 300. You can make more than one artboard at once if you want. If you've got a few designs to spread across a few different pages, you can do that. All right. And then there's a couple of other little options. We don't care about bleeds. CMYK color has been really good for me, but I believe, yep, you can change it to RGB if that's your flavor. And you've got some other settings and stuff here. But for the basics, this is what we want. We want it set to millimeters. If you don't do this part now, you are going to kick yourself later on down the track when you're trying to do accurate measurements. All right, so we're going to hit create. And really basically, it drops you into this big blank page. All right. Illustrator has a couple of sections to look for. First up, you have your toolbar on the left, and you can see that I've got a whole range of tools and bits and bobs to have a look at. And then over here, we've got some stuff about properties and everything else along those lines. We'll have a look at that in a minute, or some of that in a minute. But for right now, we're going to do a little name tag project because that's a nice, simple beginner level project to do. And anytime I've been teaching Illustrator, it's my go-to first lesson is doing a little name tag. It gets some buy-in, gets some individuality going, and it takes you through some basic tools. All right, so to do a little name tag or a key ring, we're going to want a rectangle. Pretty straightforward. And I can click and drag to generate my rectangle. And you should see a width and a height measurement coming up. All right, and I can try and manually put that in. I can do that however I need to try and get a reasonable size. All right, and that is it. All right, clicking and dragging is not very efficient, but there's two ways to either tidy it up if you've clicked and dragged and you need to edit a size, or even if you need to edit a size later, or there's another way straight from the bat with the rectangle tool. Instead of clicking and holding down that clicker and dragging it around to get a size, if I single click with my left cursor, you'll see that a little pop-up box comes and I can manually enter measurements into that box and hit OK, and it generates a box exactly the right size. All right. The other way I was talking about is if you've got some modifications to make, or if you didn't quite get it right, is over here you have width and height of the box that you've got selected. So if I select this one, you'll see it's 50 by 25. If I select this one, you'll see it's 51.858 by 23.283. All right, I can just straight away adjust that in these boxes. All right, clicking and just doing that. All right, and that's tidied it up and it will automatically snap to that. The other thing that you can do is you can position your objects on your sheet. All right, that's using this setting here. All right, so setting a reference point. All right, so this is for the sheet. So if I'm using the top left as my reference point, that's this point here, and this measurement is my X and my Y coordinates from that point. So if I change this to 10 and hit enter, you'll see that it should move 10 millimeters away from this vertical edge. All right, and I can do the same here. All right, and that means that it's 10 millimeters from the top. This is really handy for spacing your objects out, getting everything sorted and getting everything tidied up. All right, that is probably the biggest thing for getting a shape on Illustrator, is its location in X and Y coordinates and its width and its height. And these things are adjustable anytime. If I go later on down the track, I go, oh, I didn't really want 50, I went 45. I can edit that in here, and all of that. Now, if I don't want something on Illustrator, I can just click it and hit the delete button. All right, so you just click the shape and hit delete on your keyboard. All right, if you stuff up, if you make a mistake for whatever reason, whatever step, and you need to go back, if you look in the edit, there is an undo down here, but it's a little bit fiddly. I suggest just getting used to using that Control-Z keyboard shortcut. All right, so Control-Z brings that straight back, and it makes your life so much easier. All right, so Control-Z is the key. This also doesn't have a very intuitive zoom, so you can't zoom in with the mouse wheel as it is. You can go to view and you can do stuff in there and zoom in. So it's Control++. All right. So that's easy enough to do if you're happy to use keyboard shortcuts. Or down the bottom here, you have a scale option. So if I go to 200%, for example, it will change my image to 200% of its actual size on my screen. So this is really handy for zooming in. All right, but again, as I said, Control+, Control-, are also good little tools. I'm going to keep it at about 300. Get my object centered so it's nice and in the right spot. All right, just be aware if you do zoom in a long way, it might become hard. If you draw a shape, you might not be able to see all of it, particularly when you're getting into larger ones. So just make sure you're familiar with zooming in, and Control- is out. All right. Or again, you can change the percentage over here. So the next part that I want to do for a key ring is I want a circle. But before that, I'm going to make some slight modifications to my shape. All right. So I've been using the selection tool at the moment to click on things and delete it. All right. What does the direct selection tool do? The direct selection tool, if I use it, all right, you'll see that I get these little circles that appear. All right. I'll show you guys what that does in a minute. But also, if I double click on an anchor point specifically, I can move individual anchor points or corners of a shape around to edit. All right. Obviously, I don't want to do that. All right. I want my generic shape. But these little circles here, for me, are a really, really cool little feature because I can click and drag and I can put a radius on these corners. All right. If you've watched a few of my videos by now, I love radiuses. I don't like sharp edges. So I'm going to throw in a 3mm radius. You'll notice that this is a click and drag option. I can't type in what I want, which is a little bit annoying, but 3.01mm is plenty good enough for me. The more you zoom in, the more accurate you can get that measurement, but that does all of them uniformly. If I wanted to just do one, you can usually just click on the specific anchor point and then only that one circle appears. All right. So that's a little handy trick if you only want to radius one corner. All right. I want to radius all of them, so I'm going to bring it into 3. And if you don't like a standard radius, as you probably saw, if I double click on it, I get the option to do an inverted radius or an inverted round, or just a straight chamfer. All right. And here I can actually type in that 3mm exact, and I can change the type of rounding as well too. So I can just tidy that up a little bit in there. That's a nice little trick to learn. All right. Now, next part of my name tag is I want a little circle, a little hole to put a keyring through. So I'm going to go to my ellipse tool here. So to get to that, you've got your rectangle tool that we've already used. If you right click on that one, you'll see other shape options come up and even a line segment tool, which is super handy. They also have keyboard shortcuts, which isn't a bad thing to learn if you're a shortcut driven person. But if not, it's pretty straightforward to get to these tools. When we're going to click ellipse, and like with the rectangle, we can click and drag to generate a shape, which is so much less efficient than a single click and typing in exactly what we want. Now, because it is an ellipse tool, it will give you a width and a height because it can make oval shapes. All right. It's not just a standard circle tool, it's an ellipse. So we want to make sure our width and our height are the same, and these will be the diameter of the shape. They're not a radius, they are a diameter. So when I hit OK, I'll get this nice little 3mm circle. Now, if I'm good with my coordinates, I can change that and put it to, should be 15 by 15. And that will put it nice and evenly in, remembering that this is 0, 0. The top corner of this was 10, 10, so I've come in another 5mm. Or if I'm not as good with that stuff, I can use line tools, obviously, to guide me. All right, so I can click and make lines that help set me up. All right, so I can click and drag with a line, or I can single click and I can make a 5mm line at 0 degrees. All right, and I can just move that around. I can align that with the edge, and you'll see that blue anchor point. And then if I Control C and Control V that line, I'll get another one, and I can rotate that shape. All right, 90 degrees. All right, which you saw I just did over here. You can rotate your shapes at any time with that, and I can align that one up. And you'll see that that all intersects nicely, and I can put my circle there. All right, that's one way you could do it if you're not as good with your coordinates, and we'll go through some more on how to use the line tool, how to do angles and stuff like that later. So if that was a really quick for you guys, that's okay. We're going to do this in more advanced stuff. Right now, we're sticking with beginners, and it doesn't really matter if your circle is not perfectly placed in the corner. All right, it can be a little bit off, and it's not going to matter or impact anything too much. Just make sure you don't put it too close to your edge line. For example, there, that's going to be a 1mm wall, and that's going to be a weak point when it comes to it later on down the track. So I'm just going to quickly change those back to 15 by 15, so I like it being spaced. All right, and that's in the right spot. Now, last step for making this nameplate is putting in a text box. So we're going to pop some text in. All right, so I use the text tool, clicked and dragged a box, and I got a whole heap of filler text in Latin. No, don't know why, just is what it is. All right, to change that now, I can hit delete or backspace on my keyboard, and I can type in whatever I want into this text box. So design to manufacture, channel name. I can change the font size over here. I can change its alignment. I can change the actual font, something I could do a cool little Gothic number. All right. I can change letter spacing. I can change line height. All of that sort of stuff can all be done through here. All right. This is usually regular, bold, or italic, but because this text type is a bold text type, it doesn't change. All right. So I'm going to leave that at 20 points. And I'm happy with that text. All right, so that's done and sorted. Now I might want to move that around in my design just to get it a bit more central. All right, notice when I move it, I get these little pink lines that say it's intersecting centers of things. All right, that's really handy to try and get everything lined up and central. All right, but that's it for today's video. All right. Keep watching for another video on how to set this file up to be laser cut, and then maybe even a quick short on how to export this as an SVG so you can give it to your laser cutter for cutting. All right, guys, until next time, make sure you guys like and subscribe to these videos. Make sure you've got those notification bells on so you can be notified of any future content, and keep on watching us. All right, thanks, guys, and I'll catch you later.